Have you been trying to do Kegels to strengthen your pelvic floor to address leaking, pelvic pain, or discomfort with intimacy, and despite your best efforts, realizing that you're not making the progress that you want to, or possibly even making your symptoms worse? Hi, I'm Dr. Chris, and in today's video, I'm going to be teaching you the 4 main common mistakes I see when people are doing their Kegels, explain why these common mistakes interrupt your progress towards strengthening your pelvic floor, and at the end of this video, I'm going to teach you how to effectively strengthen and coordinate your pelvic floor so you can do so with confidence. If you are curious about learning about your pelvic floor anatomy and its 4 important functions, I'll leave a link down in the description below for the other video that I did on that as well. Let's dive into the 4 most common mistakes when doing Kegels. Mistake number 1, not knowing the intention behind doing Kegels. The goal of Kegels should not be to hulk out your pelvic floor or to get it toned or to make it extra tight down there. Extra tension in these muscles actually adds to pelvic floor symptoms and dysfunction. Too much tension doesn't allow those muscles to work properly. A healthy pelvic floor is one that maintains a certain amount of tension, but also has flexibility in the system to respond and work with the other muscles of our core team and neighboring hip muscles. The goal of Kegel training is to teach your brain how to sequence your pelvic floor with your core team in your day-to-day activities. At first, this will be a conscious coordination process as you are learning it. And with practice, it will then eventually become automatic and you won't even have to think about it. That's actually how the pelvic floor is designed to work. Mistake number 2, using the wrong muscles. You clench your jaw, you lift your shoulders, you squeeze your butt or your inner thighs, etc. If this happens to you, this is feedback that your body is choosing other muscles to sub in for your pelvic floor. And also this highlights that the brain needs coordination training, like I mentioned in mistake number 1, about how to be able to sequence your pelvic floor more specifically instead of trying to choose other muscles to do its job. Mistake number 3, just squeezing. Squeezing alone is only half of a Kegel. We need to be able to both contract and lengthen in order for a muscle to be working effectively. The same is true for the pelvic floor. This group of muscles is part of our body's shock absorbing system, and it works with the core and hip muscles for us to be able to walk, run, and move throughout our day-to-day. If our pelvic floor isn't able to contract and lengthen well, then its shock absorbing system decreases, and this results in other muscles compensating for the pelvic floor more specifically. When this happens, this increases the likelihood of low back pain, hip pain, leaking, and other pelvic floor dysfunction to occur. Mistake number 4, holding your breath. Your pelvic floor and diaphragm are designed to work together as a piston. Your diaphragm is the main breathing muscle that lives in the base of your rib cage, and it coordinates with your pelvic floor. When we take a breath in, your diaphragm lowers and the pelvic floor reflexively lengthens in response. The opposite occurs when we exhale. The diaphragm contracts, lifting up, and that reflexively invites the pelvic floor to contract and lift as well. If we hold our breath, that interrupts this piston system from being able to occur optimally, which means that the pelvic floor now isn't able to do her job well and instead has extra downward pressure being applied on top of her while you are now trying to do your Kegel exercises. Now let's take what we've learned from the 4 mistakes earlier and now learn how to practice and coordinate our pelvic floor effectively. I'm gonna grab my towel roll here. I recommend rolling it up so it's a small towel roll like this, and you're going to be sitting on it lengthwise so that you can have feedback throughout your pelvic floor. I want it to be in contact with your vaginal opening as well as the anal opening, because when we're practicing our Kegel, we are working throughout the entirety of the pelvic floor, as well as wanting to notice what is happening between the 2 sits bones. That's what this towel is here for, to give us that feedback. As we demonstrate, I'm going to turn profile so you can see a little bit more clearly how I'm moving and coordinating. So I'm sitting on my towel roll and we're going to go through this Kegel practice together. Phase 1 is going to be starting to invite that breath awareness and noticing what our pelvic floor is doing in that process. So first, when we take that breath in, I want you to think about breathing space between your 2 sits bones. This is going to create that length of the pelvic floor and you should feel it gently melt down into the towel. Reflexively, when we breathe out, I want you to think about drawing your 2 sits bones together to hug around that towel As you blow air out, as if you are blowing out candles, there should be a little bit of energy in that exhale. So practice that here on your towel with your feet flat on the floor. You're gonna inhale, think about inviting that space between your sits bones, letting that pelvic floor fully melt. And then exhale, creating a gentle contraction of those two sits bones towards each other while you pretend to blow candles out. Once again, inhaling to melt that space between your two sits bones. Exhale to draw those sits bones together as you blow your candles out. That's phase one. And yes, it takes a lot of mental coordination. So if this already feels a little bit challenging, know that you're not alone. Again, with practice, this will become more automatic. Part two is going to build off of that breathing pattern. And now we're going to add a little bit more of a conscious lengthening and a little bit more of a conscious contraction with each phase of our breath. So again, as we inhale, I want you to think about that space that you're generating between your two sits bones, but also inviting some length and relaxation through the back portion of our pelvic floor towards your tailbone. Tension in this back portion of the pelvic floor is really common. I want you to think about really relaxing that anal sphincter on your inhale to really feel that full lengthening into the towel. On your exhale, I want you to think about a gentle contraction from your tailbone towards the midpoint of your two sits bones, and then continuing that energy of drawing the sits bones together and pulling that pelvic floor up towards your pubic bone. One more time, inhaling to create that space and length. Exhale to contract and lift as you blow your candles out. And then part three, we're gonna add on now, which is the lower abdominal connection portion of your Kegel. So I'm gonna put my pelvis down here because I want you to take your hands and place them across your low belly. I like to have my two front hip bones right across the edge of my palm here, and my fingers are gonna come towards center. Now we're gonna do everything that we just did in step 1 and 2, but now as you inhale, I want you to generate space across your abdomen as if you are creating space between your two front hip bones, and you should feel your belly expand into your hands. You should also similarly feel that expansion down into your pelvic floor, melting into the towel. Now on your exhale, as you blow your candles out, there's that lift of the pelvic floor as well as a contraction of drawing your two front hip bones towards center. This creates that extra final lift with the pelvic floor because our low abdominals work directly with our pelvic floor to generate that support. So once again, we inhale to expand the belly. Exhale to draw the belly back towards center. Inhale, generating that expansion here as well as expansion down into the towel. Exhale to draw the belly as well as that co-contraction of the pelvic floor to lift up. So again, practicing these components all together eventually is that full coordination piece that I mentioned throughout the video. We need this mental training to go with the physical training of our pelvic floor and our core team to really be able to help all of those teammates work together. As this becomes more automatic, then the next work where we take this to is into real life in motion. So playing around with squats, lunges, other types of movement is going to be what's coming up in future videos to help you understand how to take this and translate it into your movement so eventually it becomes automatic for all of your activities. Thanks for following along.